A very good afternoon to you all. Welcome back to Findmypast From Home, the free family history series designed with you in mind. We've got a very special, very exciting midweek session for you today. My name is Ellie. I'm Senior Community Executive at Findmypast. Please say hello in the comments. Where are you tuning in from today? What's the weather like? How your day is going? And what you like most about fashion history when it comes to family history. Please also say hello to who is in the comments today, monitoring from Findmypast side. It's Thomas, who has recently joined Findmypast, so please do say hi to him. Be nice. I know you will be nice. So what are we going to be nattering about today? Well, family history records can be used for a variety of different areas of research, even fashion history. And when we think about our ancestors and we research our ancestors, we want to build up that bigger picture. We want to be able to see them in sharper detail than ever before. But do we ever stop to think about what they might have worn? We wear clothes, and so did our ancestors, and they're really, really personal. If you think about the choices you make when you put on your clothes, I think that's a quote from, is it The Devil Wears Prada? I think it is from The Devil Wears Prada. Anyway, a while back, fashion and dress historian Dr. Kate Strasdin came across an incredible dress diary. She'd made it her mission to research the woman who made the dress diary and to find out more about it. You might remember this dress diary because Kate has been on Findmypast From Home twice before, and I'm so pleased to announce the culmination of this research. So I'm going to welcome back Kate Strasdin. Hello.
Hi, Ellie. Thanks so much for having me back. It's really nice to be here again.
Really excited to have you, Kate. And if anybody isn't familiar with you and your work, would you mind just introducing yourself, please?
Sure. So I'm a dress historian and I teach down at Falmouth University in the southwest of the UK. Have been doing that for about 14 years and love teaching, but also around that, I do my own research. So my first major research project was into the dress of early women mountaineers. So that was, I loved that. It was all about trying to find stories, often stories of hidden women, I realised. My doctoral research was about the wardrobe of Queen Alexandra, who was Queen Victoria's daughter-in-law. So finding out what things survived, but also the people that made them. So again, there's quite a mix of people whose everyday jobs it was to work for the royal household. And then this has been something I've been working on for the last 5 or 6 years, the dress diary. And so it's a real mix of teaching and writing, and that's what I love.
Lovely. I'm just going to welcome some of the community members joining us. We've got Gina with us today. Hello. Jenny joining us from a sunny Norfolk. We have had a little bit of sun here in Edinburgh, but it's been a sort of gloomy sort of day. It's been very bizarre. Betty Jo joining us from California. We've got Kim with us. Carol, good afternoon. I love doing family history and making clothes. Also, dress history is so interesting. This is definitely one for you then, Carol. You're going to love this. Okay, yeah, lots of you here. This is fantastic. Linda saying, really looking forward to seeing the book.
Yeah, thanks, Linda.
And Ellen saying, I hope this helps me date photos of unknown relatives. This might actually help a little bit with that. It might give you some inspiration. What's really exciting is that we have, I've got a copy here of Kate's new book. This is out on the 23rd of February. And this is my copy, so you can't have this one. But there is one also for one lucky commenter today. So if you would like to win a copy of Kate's upcoming book, it's out on the 23rd of February, The Dress Diary of Mrs. Anne Sykes, the combination of all of this research, all I'd like you to do, if you'd like to win, leave a comment on this stream telling us your favourite fashion era. Now, we're not going to close this until 11:59 p.m. UK time on Sunday, the 19th of February. So you've got a little bit of time, and for anybody watching it back who's not watching live. So your favorite fashion era to win, to be in a chance of winning this, and I will post it to you. Isn't that exciting, Kate?
Brilliant. Good luck.
And if you do have any questions for Kate, please do leave them in the comments as well, and we will try and get to as many as we can a little bit later on. So feel free to drop those in. So this is an amazing achievement, Kate. I've read a little bit of it. I cannot wait to read the entire thing. I'm so excited. And what I've read so far is just wonderful. Remind us how you found this dress diary. I know you've joined us before on Find My Past From Home to talk about the dress diary, but how did you come across it, and why did you think it was so special? Because I imagine things like that are really, really rare. Rare. We'll go with rare. There we go.
They are really rare. It's one of those hugely serendipitous moments. I was a lace maker. Well, I'm a lace maker, and pre-COVID times, every month would go down to a lace class with predominantly women, all much older than me. And so it was a really lovely opportunity. I had young kids, and it was just a Saturday every month where I could have a few hours to myself. And after one of the meetings, one of the older lace makers came up to me, and she knew what I did for a job. So she said, would you be interested in stuff that I need to get rid of? And she was clearing out her apartment and had a load of stuff that her family didn't want. And so I went down there, and it was actually one January, February, but in 2016. So it was a few years ago now. And she had just tons of stuff. It turned out she'd worked in the theatre world in London in the 60s. And so it just amassed loads of stuff, things like dress patterns and garments as well. So she had Victorian and Edwardian garments, and she didn't know what to do with them. So I was very happy to take them all away. And some of them went to a museum, some of them went to the archive in our university. And then right at the bottom of a trunk, the very last trunk that she had, there was this parcel wrapped up in brown paper. And she said, oh God, I'd forgotten about that. It was something that was given to me. And so basically she had, when she was working in the theatre in the 1960s, somebody who worked for her, a young guy, had given her this volume, and he'd found it on just a junk stall in Camden Town Market, paid a few pence for it, I think, and he thought it might be useful for her because it was full of fabrics. And he thought, well, she works in the theatre, in the wardrobe, it would make a really interesting example of period fabrics. And so she kept it but never did anything with it, and then she gave it to me. And so it is incredibly rare. That and I knew as soon as I unwrapped the parcel and saw what was inside, I knew immediately that it was something really special, but no provenance. So she didn't know anything about it, and that was where the whole journey began.
Yeah, I mean, you have shown it to us on a previous Find My Past From Home session. Is it still in your possession, or have you donated it to some lovely museum?
It is in my possession because I feel like there's still an awful lot to find out. So although the book is culmination of lots of stories, there's still just tons that I want to find out about fabrics, about even recently some curators from the Science Museum who are working on printed cotton samples in the National Archive. We're sort of looking at seeing if we can match up some of those, because Anne Sykes does actually name certain print works in her sources, in her labels, and so there's still lots to do, and I think it will be something I'll work on for a while yet.
I mean, there are some samples of the dress diary itself in the images section of the book. So I don't know if any of you from home can see this. I really hate breaking spines. Really hate breaking spines. But this is just a little taste of the sort of things that the dress diary contains, and it's all of these beautiful swatches of fabric, and most of them have got names and notes by them, right?
Yeah. And they're really, so there's over 2,000 swatches in the book, and there's over 100 different names, and they're all written in the third person. That was the first thing that was difficult. There was no means of identifying. They just say things like Emma Taylor's sash or Mrs. Gregg's bonnet ribbon, 1843. They're very, very sparse. So although I've called it a diary, the entries are very, very sparsely written. There isn't a great deal of detail.
And what I love as well, there's such a variation of patterns and designs. And maybe I think naively that we're talking about 150 years ago, right? Maybe I think that, they're how am I trying to phrase this properly? Maybe sort of dressmaking and material making wasn't as advanced as I thought it was. But you look at this, and with the boom of sort of the cotton industry, and honestly, it's just spectacular. I hope that the winner of this book will appreciate these as well. I'll just show you some more. They're just spectacular. And then the other thing is, because you've got the original one in your possession, you can feel them as well.
I know, they're really they are really special, and it was the variety. It's because there's silks and cottons and there's wool and huge variety of different fabric types, and then all of these names. But you're right, it's I think the lady that was saying earlier on about dating photographs from her family, we look at old photographs and we do think of Victorian and Edwardian and even 1920s, 30s, 40s. We think of people being in black and white. It's very hard to imagine that colour. And they were fabulously colourful, really, really bright.
You're so right, because if we look at a painting, for example, or we'll go with a painting, you can see quite vibrant colours coming through in that. But if you look at a photograph of your ancestor from, say, the Victorian time or times of the Edwardian times, you will be seeing that in black and white or a sepia. And it's really quite hard to imagine that colour, but the colour was there. People loved colour. And this dress diary is just so evident of that. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's full of colour.
So there's this one, you did a little bit digging around. You have this dress diary, or I say tearing it to pieces, not physically.
Yes.
Researching it, interrogating it, that's probably a better word. And you found that it was compiled by one woman, Mrs. Anne Sykes. So who was she?
So there is just one swatch out of all of those 2,000 in the book where she identified herself by name. So she wrote above a printed cotton, it said Anne Sykes dress, May 1840, and then it said the first dress I wore in Singapore, and that was the only time that she mentioned herself. And so once you have that detail, because then it was possible to find, there was a wedding dress associated with Anne Sykes and then Adam Sykes. But because they were all written in the third person, at that point, you couldn't really tell that the book had belonged to her. So once I knew it was her, I went back to the wedding dress and it said that they had got married in 1838. Oh, yes, you've got
It's in here. I remember seeing it. Hold on. You keep talking, I'll find it.
And so, and this is where the family history and the census records and everything just made this. There they are. That's Anne's wedding dress and Adam's wedding waistcoat, and the dress that she wore to the wedding breakfast afterwards.
That's beautiful.
And so that unlocked the whole book, because I searched online for Anne Sykes, Adam Sykes, September 1838, and anyone that's used census records know that will throw up all sorts of helpful things. And I was able to find Anne and Adam Sykes, and they got married in Tyldesley in Lancashire in 1838. And other people on that census record that were witnesses at the wedding were actually names that were in the book. So I knew I'd found the right people. And there it just kind of unraveled, because various people, once I had them, they acted as the kind of anchor. But then there were other people that I could identify. So once you knew who her parents were, for example, then some of the other names in the book began to make sense. The Burtons and various other characters that were cropping up. And particularly if it's an unusual name. There was one brilliant name called Bridget Ann Peacock. And because she's got an unusual name, it was so much easier to find her in the census records. Whereas Fanny Taylor, who I think was a close friend of Anne's and features frequently, but it was almost impossible to find her. It was impossible to find her because it was such a common name.
It's just amazing how, as you say, the research started to unravel nicely once you'd found them in the census, and then that unlocked so much more. And it just goes to show that family history records are amazing.
Oh, they were. And it was the first time. So I mean, I've researched, been a historian for the best part of 20 years, but it was the first time I'd done actual sort of genealogical research, and I was quite nervous at the beginning because I thought, this is new to me. This isn't, I don't normally, it's another way of working, sort of tracking back through records and making sure you've got the right people. And but I just loved it, and it just, having these swatches of fabric on the one hand, and then actually seeing real people's lives and their occupations and where they lived on the other, just brought it all together.
Something we talk about quite a lot on Findmypast From Home, which is fan research, which is friends, associates, neighbours. And if Jen's watching today, she'll be like, "Yay, fan research!" But this is fan research in action, because you found all of these names and associates and people that she would have made clothes for in this diary, and then by researching them not only as individuals but also as people who knew each other, we've got this incredible picture of this woman and her life and her career and her husband and her
yeah,
I could go on and on.
It really is. And I think rather than she collected these things as a kind of memory of all these people that she knew and friends and family. That was her, rather than collect autographs or poems or other things that women did at that time in these kind of keepsake books. She collected scraps of fabric. And I think it was because her family were very involved with textiles. Her father was a cotton spinner in Lancashire, and so he owned 4 mills. So she was pretty well to do. She was. This is not a working class diary. Their family were quite wealthy, and then she married Adam, who was a merchant, and became independently quite wealthy as well. So this is just a way of her capturing all of the people that mattered in her life.
And she travelled quite a bit as well, didn't she?
She did, and that was so unexpected, because when I saw that swatch that said the first dress I wore in Singapore, of course I know that Singapore, particularly in the middle of the 19th century, is a very, very long way. It's not somewhere that you just pop over for a honeymoon or something like that. So I couldn't really anticipate what that actually meant. But essentially, Adam was given a job. He'd been merchant for some time, but he was given the job of heading up merchant operations in Singapore for the company that he worked for. And so they left Liverpool on July the 1st, 1840. And there's a really lovely bit in the diary, actually. There's a swatch of a little lace cuff, and it says lace cuff got in Liverpool, July 1840. And so once I'd found the shipping records that showed when they sailed, I knew that must have been the last thing that she bought she must have just been having perhaps a day's shopping before getting on the boat, and that was perhaps a little memory of home, the last bit of home before she sailed. And it was a 4-month journey. They arrived in Singapore in November. I know. And then she marks her arrival with this dress, where she says, the first dress I wore in Singapore. So she arrives in this sort of outpost in 1840, and she was there for 7 years, and it was a small European community at that point, and there were tiger attacks, and there was no real sort of infrastructure of things like medical help or anything like that. So she'd gone from being this very comfortable daughter of a mill owner in Lancashire to this complete other world.
Yeah, I'm just picturing this woman. I mean, as you said, it wasn't like she was working class. She was
No.
quite well to do, but to go from Lancashire and to just travel literally halfway around the world for 7 years and make a life out there.
Yeah. And that makes the swatches, I think, even more sort of poignant as well, because often I think her friends and family were sending her swatches from home. So she does include swatches from family during the years that she's out there. And I suppose they're quite small, and they were perhaps pretty easy to slip into an envelope when you're posting letters, and they acted as those sort of mementos from all of her loved ones at home. And you do get a sense, there's a character in the book, a lady called Mrs. Maria Balestia, And I discovered that she was the wife of the first American consul of Singapore. And there's quite a few of her swatches are in the book. And her letters have actually been digitized by the Massachusetts Historical Society. So you could read all of them online. This is the other amazing thing about online records now, is how much you can do online. So I managed to read her letters, and that gave a real sense of what it was like living in Singapore at that time. She had a really tough time. She didn't, the climate she found very difficult. She didn't really have very many friends, and it was just, you get that sense of real homesickness. And the letters take sort of 4 months to get home and then to receive letters. So you only maybe hear from home perhaps 3 times a year if you're lucky. And you get that sense of isolation. So it's a really interesting life that these women were leading. And you never hear about the women. It's always in the histories. It's always the men who were building the churches and the theatres and all of those kinds of things. And the women are just kind of there hanging on in the background.
Another thing I love as well, and it's evident from what I've read so far, is that the dress diary is, I don't know if I can describe it as this, it's sort of not only a love letter to fashion, but it's a love letter to the people who were in her life as well. And without this, that has actually probably survived by chance and come to you by chance. We just have such an amazing insight into her life, and I just love that.
I know. I think that Anne and Adam didn't have children, so it is an accident it survived, really. In her will, she left all of her effects to her brother. 2 of her brothers were her executors, and so I think the diary probably ended up with one of her sisters-in-law. How it then made its way from Lancashire to London, I have no idea. But it is a testament to all of those people that were in her life, and how much she sort of valued them and kept them. And I think we can all think of bits of fabric that have been important, or garments that have been important to us through our lives, that we would remember. You'd only have to see the pattern or the material and you'd remember the place that you wore it. So I wonder if she did the same, that she would perhaps, when she was older, she would look back through it and remember all of the different times that these things were worn.
Absolutely. Now, we've already mentioned a few of the other names in the dress diary. Are there any real standout characters? What are their stories?
There are a couple that really, for very different reasons, that I love. One of them is the kind of unlikeliest swatch, which is the pirate flag. There's a pirate flag. So on one of the pages, right at the top, it doesn't look like anything much because it's a kind of a ratty bit of red wool, and the caption reads, "Part of the pirate flag captured by the Admiral in Borneo, 1845," which I couldn't quite kind of figure what was going on, but I did search online and found that there was a man called Admiral Sir Thomas Cochrane, who was on anti-piracy duties in the region at that time. He'd been tasked to take HMS Agincourt, and the pirates were kind of working their way up and down the straits, because obviously there were many merchant vessels. And the fact that it's a red flag is really terrifying, because a red pirate flag meant no quarter given, so no mercy shown. So if you have this pirate ship coming towards you with its red flag showing, then that is the terrifying thing. But what I love is she'd stuck it on the same page. Underneath it is this scrap of blue velvet that reads "Adam's birthday slippers, 1842." And it's just kind of pirate flag, slippers. And that's what's so brilliant. The book has got so much. And then the other swatch that I love is there's one at the back. And again, this shows how records can be just reveal. This was the census record. So I'd made a note of, there was a printed cotton and it just says Mrs. Charnock above it, but nothing else. So it was really, it was one of those that didn't really mean very much. But then I was going through the 1851 census records, and this name just rang a bell in their household. So there was Anne and Adam, and then there were a couple of people visiting, and then right at the bottom it said Margaret Charnock. And when I clicked on her name, she was their cook. And that's a really amazing to have a piece of, working class dress doesn't survive very much at all in museums, or, it wasn't considered valuable enough. It would be now. So to have this swatch, and then I was able to track back through the records and find out about Margaret. And so that was really, Margaret's definitely somebody whose life would go unremarked on, because she didn't, she wasn't keeping a diary or making a note of her world. And so I loved that there were those voices as well.
Absolutely. And as you said, 2,000 odd swatches and well over 100 names, is it? I can't remember the exact numbers. That's an amazing sort of web of people.
Yeah.
Just as a reminder for everybody watching, if you are watching live, if you do have a question for Kate, please feel free to leave it in the comments and we will try and get to as many as possible. If anybody's watching on Twitter, you can't leave a comment, so come over to Facebook or YouTube and you can comment there. Thanks. So we've talked a lot about Anne and the people that are mentioned in the book, and this cook who, given that she was working class, her fashion and what she wore might not have survived very much if it weren't for this dress diary. And what I quite love is that it's an extraordinary little glimpse into Victorian fashion, but also Victorian life as well. Mm-hmm. If you were to, this might be a very open-ended question, but how can we use the story of Anne and the people mentioned in it, and also the swatches and the fashion, how can we use that to learn more about our Victorian ancestors? What can we glean from that? What assumptions can we make?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, that you can find quite a lot from not very much. So what I found, as I say, Anne isn't writing very much. So you might often find that you only get a couple of lines about something, or just the merest clue. And it's amazing what you can then sort of further research will help you with. So with the book, each chapter is a different theme of Victorian life. So whether it's laundry or mourning dress, as in grief mourning, whether it's things like lace making and interior design, things like that start with the swatch and then move into things like the census records. And as soon as you have, for example, an address, then you can start looking at old maps. And so once I had an address for somewhere that Anne and Adam lived, I was able to find, there are lots of open access maps online. Because it's worth mentioning, I wrote all of this through the pandemic. So I had all of these great plans to go and do lots of research visits. And then they never happened because obviously we were in lockdown. And so things like maps, so I was able to get a sense of the kind of landscape that they were living in. I was able to sometimes, so once I had looked at things like interior design, because Anne includes a few interior fabrics. So then I would go and have a look at research that was talking about interior paintings at that time and seeing what the interiors of drawing rooms looked like, or going to look at Mrs. Beeton, all of these things online. Anyone that's ever used internetarchive.org, that's an amazing resource for out of print books. So you can just read them online. They've been scanned in. So I spent lots of times looking at things like etiquette manuals and household manuals. They're all there. So just one thing can take you off in lots of different directions and help you with just rounding out the picture of the family life and what people were doing.
It's so true, isn't it? And I think everybody watching will have come across that feeling as well. You find the tiniest little thing, and that one little thing can open so many doors. It's why we always say, when you've got a record, particularly if you've got an original image of a family history record, to look at every tiny little thing. I've been doing some research for Findmypast, of which I will say more about in months to come. But in any case, I was messaging Jen and I said, is it too much of a leap to say that this guy went from this occupation to that occupation? Because it was a bit of a big leap. And Jen's like, yeah, I'd want to see the paper trail. I don't know if this is the same guy. And then I found a marriage record and I was looking at the witnesses and the father's name and the father's occupation. And I was right. My hunch was right. It was a huge leap. And it's those little details like that that can line up, get all your ducks in a row. Or you could look at a record that you've looked at 5 times already and you notice something that you've never noticed before. And then that one thing unlocks so much.
Exactly. Because I think that's what happened with the mark. I'd looked at that 1851 census record lots, and I think it was just that one time I'd made the connection between the memory of the name in the album jumping out at me and thinking, hang on, I've definitely seen that before, and then making that connection. And so yeah, it's always worth revisiting things because you forget what you've picked up along the way that might make an earlier nugget kind of suddenly make sense.
Oh, the one thing I wanted to ask you, do you have a favourite swatch?
Do I have a favourite swatch? Oh, it's really hard. I do love, obviously the one, I do love the one that Unlock I Know. How can you possibly choose? I think probably the one where Anne identifies herself, which I think is in there. It's a very sort of tiny floral printed cotton. And were it not for that, then it would have just remained, I mean, a treasure all the same, but it would have remained anonymous, because if she hadn't just that one time said the dress I wore, then we would never have been any the wiser about who she was. So I think that probably is the most important one for sure.
Yeah, and this is the vest I had on at the time.
Yes,
that's Adam.
Yeah, that's his wedding vest, which was another name for a waistcoat.
Honestly, they're just spectacular. If you don't win a copy of this or win this copy, I think you should all just go out and buy it or borrow it from your local library.
Oh yes, and there it is. It's the one on the right hand side there at the top. That's the Anne Sykes. That's the one where she just comes clean momentarily and says, "Oh hi, here I am."
This something dress, I was in Singapore, November 1840. It's very small. But you can...
It was tiny writing, trying to decipher that writing. Some of the swatches were, even with a magnifying glass, it was really hard to read what she'd written.
It makes things like this make me so happy.
I know.
Again, this is something that comes up on Findmypast From Home quite a lot, but in times gone by, things like family history were the history of great families in inverted commas, and this is just some ordinary woman and her amazing work, and we have a little piece of this.
I know, and I think it's those hidden women that are really very often, and I think I found other of these sorts of dress diaries. There are about 5 or 6 that I've found so far in the States. And there's one other in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London that was associated with a lady called Barbara Johnson. But I haven't found any others in the UK. And I don't think it's that they didn't exist or that they don't exist. There might be some kind of in the back of a cupboard somewhere, or I think it's just that they weren't valued. And so they just wind up being sort of either chucked away or just stored somewhere, and they're not really, because they were kind of women's hobbies, that they were seen as women's hobbies, and so they weren't valued as artistic kind of practices, really.
I think that's the perfect in for me to ask my next question. If anybody does happen to come across something similar, or even something not so similar, but a piece of not even their ancestor, but a little piece of history that happens to fall into their lap, what is your advice? What would they do with it?
Well, there's so many people, curators and researchers are always really happy to share their knowledge and expertise. So it's always worth doing a bit of research to find out who is an expert in that particular field, depending on what it is that you find. But obviously, places like the V&A are great because they have a whole range of experts in different artistic mediums. And then local museums can often be really helpful. Even if they, I'm always surprised at how many local museums, for example, have amazing dress and textile collections. They just don't have it out on display. So reserve collections are always really big, and you'll find that curators are very knowledgeable about all kinds of things. So yeah, contact local museums, or now that the internet has so many amazing forums on various different, whether it's whatever it might be, photographs or anything else, there's always that kind of resource as well.
I'd love to come across something like this. There's a secondhand bookshop here in Edinburgh that I like frequenting, because every now and then there's a little, I mean, I've never come across anything hugely massive, but last time I was there, I was looking in the old books section, like the quite old books, and I like to go to the front and I like to see who's written their name in, and I'd then like to see if I can go and find a little bit about them.
I know. All of these hints about lives that are just left behind, and yeah, it's a treat.
Absolute treat. Okay, let's do a couple of questions, shall we? Okay, so first of all, we have a question from, let's just find it, from Linda. How do we think Anne would feel knowing that her diary was now famous?
That's a really good question, Anne. Linda, sorry, because I've often wondered that, whether her motive was obviously trying to memorialize the people that she knew. But I don't imagine she thought that it would be in the public domain at any point. And yet, I wonder if she'd be hopefully quite pleased that people haven't entirely forgotten all of these lives that she encountered during her own lifetime. When I did my research into Queen Alexandra and her wardrobe, I quite often thought, I'm not sure she would have been very happy. Because she was obviously a public figure, but private in some respects. And so whenever I was looking at the insides of her dresses and things, I used to think, I don't think she would probably like this very much. But with Anne Sykes, I like to think that she would be happy that her endeavours had not been completely forgotten.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and it means that her work lives on as well. Question from Michelle. Did you publish the book yourself?
No, so it's been published by Penguin. Penguin Vintage. So it is. It's really interesting because prior to this, I've always published through academic publishers, and this is the first commercial publisher. And it's amazing because they were able to resource it with things like photographing some of the pages from the book. So I took the diary up to London last summer, which was a very nerve-wracking experience because I had it in a rucksack on my back on the tube, and I was, oh God, felt like it should be padlocked to my wrist or something. And I took it to a photographic warehouse in London, and it was photographed on this amazing machine where they had a really high resolution big camera that came down from the top and photographed the pages beautifully. So that was brilliant. That wouldn't have been possible with sort of smaller publishers. So yeah, I was really lucky.
Lovely. Okay, I did spot another one down here from Carol. What fabric is your favourite if you're making a garment? And did Anne Sykes have a favourite fabric?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not a dressmaker myself. I would love to be, but I am an embroiderer and a lace maker. So I really love thread and the things that you can turn it into. So I would say, yeah, for me, it's the threads that can embellish things. And I think cotton was very important to her, partly because it was her father's business, and partly I think the patterns. So many of the swatches that she includes are printed cottons, and it's a time where cotton, the printed cotton industry, is really revolutionary. It's like the kind of cutting edge techno textile of its day. because they've figured out a way of roller printing rather than block printing, and it meant that you could have lots of really complicated multiple layered patterns, and she really went for those. So I think probably that was her favorite.
Good question, Carol. Thank you. We've got a couple of comments as well that I just want to highlight. Victoria says, what a beautiful tribute honouring a lady and her life's work and fabrics.
Oh, thanks, Victoria.
I echo those sentiments. Victoria also says, I have a patchwork blanket made by my grandmother after the war using scraps of fabric, just squares grouped together to keep family members warm. Nothing fancy, but if only it could talk.
Oh,
if only she'd make notes on it.
I think we're nothing fancy. That's the thing. It's lives, isn't it? Those are the really important objects, because really this is a bit like a quilt that hasn't been. The book is like a quilt that's been deconstructed, or one that was never sewn together. It's like all the parts of a quilt. And yeah, I think they're really special.
Georgia said we should all be starting to keep diaries again for our descendants to inherit.
I did start a book in so I gave a paper on this in Florence at a conference a few years ago, and bought this lovely marbled book, because the diary itself is marbled, covered in silk. So I bought a marbled book with the intention of asking people to give me some swatches of their fabrics that they might have. So I'm still thinking about it. I think it would be a great idea.
I think you should, because if anybody follows Kate on Twitter and Instagram, you share snippets of some of the most beautiful items of clothing, and in some cases that's a dress diary.
That's a really good point. I'd never thought about it like that. Of course it is, really. Yeah.
It's all these different garments and fabrics that you find.
Yes. And I do think about how I put it together. I do think, oh, I better not do another green dress today because I did one and then it won't look right. I mean, yeah, I think it does. I do piece it together in a particular way. So yeah, really good point.
Oh, lovely. Oh, we've got a comment from Ellen earlier. We've gone quiet. Yes, this happens when the comments stop. This means that you guys are all so interested in what we're talking about. It's actually a really good sign. Okay, right. Let me just see if there are any more questions. Comment from Michelle here. I wrote a diary of my wedding journey, the costs and the people that helped out at our medium-sized wedding. It's in the loft. That would be such a lovely thing for your family.
Definitely keep that, Michelle. And I hope somebody finds it one day and treasures it and asks all of the questions about what's inside. And it's a really important document. I don't think we realise how important these documents are. Sometimes we can't envisage what they might mean to people in decades to come. So I think they're really significant.
I'm now envisaging, after we spoke about it a little bit before, the journey that dress diary went on from when Anne died and she left her effects to her brother, to go from there to what is it, some
London.
sort of charity shop, or
fleet, like a junk stall on a market stall. So in fact, it's done an amazing round trip. It started off in Lancashire, then it went to Singapore for 7 years, then it went to Shanghai for 2 years because they lived there for 2 years, then it came back to Lancashire. Anne and Adam died in just north of Blackpool. Adam in 1888 and Anne in 1890, and then it travelled from Lancashire to London and then London to Devon, which is where it is now. So it has had a remarkable journey. And actually, I must tell you about a journey that I had quickly, which is that at the end of, so this has happened since I think we spoke last, and once all the lockdowns had been lifted and I'd just finished the manuscript, and it felt a bit unfinished. And because of all the records, family records I'd been able to find, I'd made a list of the various addresses that had come up in the census records. And so last January, I went on a bit of a pilgrimage in search of Anne. And so I started off and went to Tyldesley, where they got married, and saw the church and the path that she would have walked along. I found her parents' grave in the churchyard, and we washed it off because it was all covered with grass. So I got some water and sort of brushed it all off, and then went to a place called Colthurst Hall, which is where they'd lived for quite a long time. Beautiful house near Clitheroe. Went and knocked on the door, and my husband was horrified. He said, "You can't just go knock on the door. I did. And lovely lady who showed us around and showed us the drawing room where Anne had her curtains that she'd included in the book. And then we went to Blackpool, where I had discovered they were staying on the night of the 1871 census, and they were in the Imperial Hotel. So we stayed in the Imperial Hotel that night. And then the next day we went to Bispam Churchyard, which is where they're both buried, and found her grave. And I planted a little flower at the bottom to say thank you. And so, yeah, it was an amazing end to the whole story.
Not me tearing up at this.
I did. It was like a cold January day, and I found her. It was this amazing Celtic cross in the churchyard, and it was, yeah, I'd found her, and I just thought, wow, she would never have imagined that I would be there doing that. That's
really lovely. I won't ask to, yeah, but it must have been a very emotional moment for you.
It was really, yeah, it was really special. I was happy that I'd been able to actually find some of the places that she'd been.
And I think Linda sums up what we're all thinking. Brilliant idea for a documentary.
Oh, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be lovely?
Yes, please. I would love that very much. I can't believe you went on a little pilgrimage to see all the sites that are associated with her. Do you know where you're going next? You're going to Shanghai and Singapore next.
That would be great. That would be great. That's next on the list.
Well, this has been a delightful 50 minutes, Kate. Thank you so much. I am so pleased that the research into the dress diary has been successful, and it's now culminated in this wonderful book. Just as a reminder, everybody, if you would like to win a copy of the dress diary of Anne Sykes, you can leave a comment on this stream. Just tell me what your favorite era of fashion is in order to enter. And we're not going to close it straight away. We're going to close it 11:59 p.m. UK time this Sunday evening. So that's the 19th, I think, if I've got my dates correct. That's the 19th. So you've got a little bit of time to enter. And then what I'll do is I'll draw a random comment and I will message you and say, right, okay, I'm going to post this out to you. Isn't that exciting?
Brilliant. Good luck.
And the book is out on the 23rd if anybody wants to go buy it or borrow it from your library.
Thank you. I hope everyone who reads it enjoys it and enjoys it as much as I did writing it. So
brilliant. And if there's anything else family history related we use family history records for in the future, please do come back and chat to us again, because we love having you here on Findmypast From Home, Kate. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
A couple of housekeeping bits before I finish up then. So obviously thank you to Kate and to everybody for joining today with your lovely comments and questions. Be sure to enter the competition. Jessie is hosting Fridays Live this week. Be sure to tune in for that. It's going to be a good one. And we also have an extra session next week as well. So a week today, Wednesday, 22nd of February, 4 p.m. UK time. We've got returning guest Jill Rossini, who's going to be talking to Mary McKee in celebration of LGBT History Month. So be sure to tune back in for that next week. I think that's all of my my housekeeping. Victoria, hold on, let's just answer this question. Will you be posting about it as joined late? Yes. So if you want to win a copy of this book, this is the book right here. All I'd like you to do is to comment with your favorite era of fashion, favorite fashion era in the comments, and I will choose one randomly, and the winner will get a copy of the book posted out to them. That's it. And it closes on Sunday. Kate, thank you so much. Keep us in the loop as to any other bits of research that you're doing. Stay in touch, and thank you everybody for joining today. I hope you have an enjoyable afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.